All right, guys, I'm really excited today because I'm sitting here with Coach Darien Pyka, and we are discussing an article that she recently wrote, which was for, what was the article?
Strong by Science.
On Strong by Science, and the article was a phenomenal article about the importance of tracking what you're doing with your athletes or your clients, testing certain variables, and tracking as you go through so you can make sure that you're ultimately getting them closer to their end goal. So what was the reason that you decided to write that article?
So I decided to write that article because I had an athlete, a professional soccer player, who came to me over the summer. I worked with her about 4 months, and she first came to me. I didn't know much about her. I didn't know much what she needed. So first I wanted to test her to make sure I trained to her needs or plan the program to her needs. So she was more the inspiration behind why I wrote that article. And I do that with a lot of the athletes that I work with. We first got to get a baseline of where they're at. And I think that's what coaches need to do more and implement into their program and their coaching style is get a baseline of where they're at first.
Absolutely. So you know where they're trying to be at the end, and you can back engineer that program to help get to that goal.
Absolutely.
And you had some really good results with Cami, I believe.
Absolutely. Especially with her jumping and her power output increased by 14%, 14 to 17% just by getting her stronger.
And this is a professional athlete, so you can see how important it is. If she wasn't tracking anything, then we could go back and say, I trained this girl for 3 months and I think she got better, but is that really going to correlate to her sport? And when Cami came in, she was talking about how she wanted to improve her speed and her power. So we tested some specific things, or you tested some specific things that were going to correlate to that. And normally with a professional athlete, we're looking for marginal improvement. So 14% improvement in a multiple different power output tests is a huge increase, and that's going to help buy-in for the client as well, because now they know that they didn't just put 3 months in and they feel better. You can show them some tangible numbers, so you can show them that they got some results, and that client is going to keep coming back year after year because they know that you can get them to that next goal.
Yeah, they trust me.
Absolutely. So what are some of the important tests that you like to use, and how do those correlate to sports?
Some of those tests, jumping tests, using the jump mat, vertical jump, counter river jump. I want to see if they're more elastic or contractile, get a feel of what kind of athlete they are. Sprinting, just want to see how fast they are. Change of direction, that 5-10-5. Other than that, anything sport specific. She had an injury, so I wanted to see what was different between right and left. The strength, so triple hop and stop, kind of things like that. That's what I started out with.
And you mentioned earlier the great part about some of those tests is not only do you get those numbers, but it gives you a lot of subjective feedback as well, so you can plan that program accordingly. Like you said, she had an injury, so you can see the differences in asymmetries, and you can plan her program to be more effective and individualized versus just a general program.
Yes.
So then after you do the testing, how do you use those results to plan the program?
So once I get the test, I see, like I said earlier, what kind of athlete she is. So is she more contractile, she's more elastic, what does she need, and then what are her goals? So her goals were to be healthy, get faster and stronger. From the vertical mat, I saw that she didn't jump as high, and she couldn't use her elastic components as much. So from the test, I can see that she needed to produce more power, especially from the jumping test. But she was also pretty elastic. She was pretty springy, especially when she would sprint. So I knew that I had to get her stronger in order to get her better and get her faster, but also maintain that elastic capabilities that she already has. So still doing the plyometrics, still doing rate of force development, but I knew the way to get her better as an athlete is to get her stronger.
So you were able to individualize her training program because you saw these little weaknesses that she might have, as well as some of her strengths. So you wanted to maintain those strengths she already had, but not waste a ton of time focusing on them, and build up some of those weaknesses to help get her to her goal a lot faster.
Absolutely. So from those tests, I can see, like I said, what kind of athlete she is, but I think of the body as different buckets. You need to fill different buckets. So she was very elastic, so she had that bucket filled up, but her strength bucket was pretty low. And this is she hasn't been strength training in 3 months, or 3 years, since she was in college. So I knew that was lacking, and I knew, asymmetries were there just from those tests. So I gathered that information to build her program.
Excellent. So then as you're going through the program, were there times where you're tracking certain variables as you went through, and then were there times you saw certain things that maybe you had to take a different focus or go a little bit different route because you weren't getting to where you need to be?
Absolutely. So I kept tracking the static jump, which we'll show you later. But that is because I wanted to see her force production. I didn't want to max squat her because I knew she wasn't going to be able to handle that. Since she hasn't been lifting in a while, I didn't want to put that stress on her from the get-go. I knew that would just cause injury. So I used a vertical jump, that static jump, to indicate how strong she was, and I kept tracking that to see if my program was working. I started off as a basic strength program, and I saw that was working. But when I would do the 20-yard sprint, I noticed that it wasn't, and I knew her form was pretty off because soccer players have kind of a funky form. So I kept testing the 20-yard sprint to see that speed, and I would have to go back if I saw it wasn't working. So I would do a lot of acceleration drills, working on that technique, and then I would go back and test a 20-yard sprint, notice it wasn't working, and I would just go back. So it's like a feedback loop a little bit.
So that's an excellent point too, because you said you're increasing her horsepower and her power output, but it wasn't necessarily correlating to her sprinting performance. So maybe part of it was, hey, we increased that horsepower, but I've got to go back and work these mechanics so she knows how to apply that horsepower into the sport. And I think that's a really important point, because most people can't draw those conclusions if they're not testing, and they don't know if what they're doing in the weight room is actually going to transfer into the sport.
Yeah.
But you, by testing the multiple different things, you're able to see it wasn't really translating, so you were able to shift the program to make sure that it's still translated to her ultimate goal was to run faster, not jump higher.
No.
But the jump test was a way to get you there.
Yep. So jump test was needed to see if the strength component was working, and then the change of direction for cutting, and then the 20-yard sprint were necessary because that's more sport specific to what she wanted in soccer.
Excellent. So that's why it's really, really important. You can't set an athlete up for success if you, number one, if you don't even have a goal in mind, you don't know what the goal is or what the destination is, it's going to be really hard to create a plan or a roadmap to help get you there. But even if we know where the destination is, if we don't back engineer that program and we have some specific tests to help us know if we're getting closer and some benchmarks, then it's very ambiguous. We're relying all on subjective feedback of if we think they run faster or they feel better, and that's really not going to get you very close to your end goal. And sometimes athletes might feel worse, and they might feel like they aren't running as fast, and then you look at the test and they're actually running faster, but they haven't connected the dots. So it's really, really important to make sure you have some kind of test that's relevant to that athlete, and you're testing something throughout the duration of the program so you can track if your program's actually working, because not every program's going to work for every athlete. So you need to be able to adapt and modify on the fly. So now we're going to take you and we're going to go through some of the tests that Coach Darien did with her athlete, and she'll break down how to do it and then what she uses those tests for. Let's go check it out. So now we're going to go through two of the exercises, the tests that Coach Darien likes to use a lot with her athletes. So I'll let you go through kind of what we're doing, how we're going to do it, and then how you use that in your programming.
So first I'm going to show you the two, and then I'll go over what they are and then what they do, what they tell me. So the first one is a static jump, hands on your hips. They pause for a few seconds, then they jump. Okay, and the second one I use is still hands on your hips, but now a counter movement. So here. So the first one, you make them pause, you diminish the stretch shortening cycle. I'm looking at power output, that's more strength. I want to see how strong they are, say for tests for looking at strength. And the second one is now they can use the stretch shortening cycle, fast down and up. And then you can compare the two. If they're about the same, that tells you one thing about the athlete, that they can't produce as much power, more elastic. Screw that up. Okay. And then, so just looking at those two, you'll get a baseline of what kind of athlete you're dealing with and how to make their program.
So we're using the jump mat, but you can also do these same jump tests with a Vertec. If you don't have any jumping equipment, you can just use a line on the wall and just jump and reach. So any type of jump testing, but we're looking at two different types of jumps. This is going to give us a measure of the jump height, and then we're going to compare those numbers. The jump is exactly the same. The difference was she went down and can you show from the side, the static hold? So she went down, she did a static hold just about halfway down in the bottom position, and she's holding it for how long?
3 seconds.
So she's holding for 3 seconds, just to remove the stretch shortening cycle, so the elasticity of the muscles, you can relax. So just to remove that elasticity, so this is going to be all how much force can they produce from the bottom, which is very correlated to strength, you said.
Yeah.
And then the counter movement jump, now that we're allowing them to use that stretch shortening cycle and the elasticness of the muscle, elasticity, and therefore, if you see a big difference, now would there be any sports or positions where it'd be okay if it was closer, or are there different types of athletes that may have a big difference?
Absolutely. If they're a volleyball player jumping, well, you want them to be more elastic. You don't want them to lose that elasticity that they have. Yeah, they can benefit from getting stronger, but that's not always their focus. So keep an athlete geared towards their strengths. But yeah, you can fill other buckets like I was talking about earlier, but that's okay for them to be really elastic and not as strong. It's okay for those numbers to be different, very different.
Right, so you see athletes who are more jumpers, like a volleyball player or football wide receiver, they're going to be more on the elastic side, and they need that for their sport. However, like you said, if you saw that number, if both numbers are really low, the overall horsepower and the output isn't there. So it doesn't matter how elastic they are, if the jump is still 12 inches, we have to increase the size of the engine and get them stronger.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that today, Coach Darien.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us.